Jazakallah for flying in from the great state of New Jersey.
Thank you very much, guys. Thanks for having me. Salam, everyone.
So we want to keep this conversation a bit more lighthearted. Make sure you all get a good flavor of what the Bitcoin community and Bitcoiners are about. I had the pleasure of meeting Maher about a year ago, and I didn't know at the time that he was the founder of Coinbits. And we just clicked and hit it off. This was in Nashville, Tennessee. And, he had this sort of enlightened spirit about him. And I was like, this brother must have been into Bitcoin early if he's this enlightened. And mashallah, Maher discovered Bitcoin early, I believe in 2013. And so I want to start with Maher's journey because he's been into Bitcoin for over a decade now. He's been through lots of ups and downs, both from a market price perspective, but also from just being in the seat of a founder who's built a business in the Bitcoin space, which is not easy. And so, Brother Maher, it would be amazing if we could start with your Bitcoin journey, and you can take it wherever you'd like and start wherever you'd like, but let's hear your Bitcoin journey.
Amazing. Thank you, brother. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm so honored. I know the brothers and the team organizing the event. We all sort of came up together in the Bitcoin community, and I'm so proud to see us focus and cater the message to the ummah, because there's nothing more important than helping our community and helping rebuild, in my opinion, the systems that we need on a strong foundation built on Islamic principles. And personally, I believe Bitcoin is the way to do this. I got introduced to Bitcoin in technically 2012, late 2012. My brother had sent me an Economist article on Bitcoin. And he says, you got to check this thing out. It's going to free Palestine. I'm like, what are you talking about, man? And I was like, I didn't understand what he was talking about at the time. And, for me, it was more of like a speculative bet. I had just lost a bunch of money in the stock market. I had whatever little scraps I had left. I'm like, let's throw it into this Bitcoin thing and wish for the best. I went on to start up my first company in 2013. It was called Inbox Messenger. It was a private messaging app at the time, and I had hired Yusuf, my brother, actually, he's a software engineer, and I totally forgot about the Bitcoin that we bought together, and it wasn't until 2014 and between 2014 and 2016. Where I got really orange pilled. As you guys have learned this term recently, it's when Bitcoin really clicks for you. The reference is sort of from the Matrix. Remember, guys, the red pill and the blue pill? So this is what we call the orange pill. And for me, it was actually the gold bugs, believe it or not. And I credit Ron Paul. If you guys remember, Ron Paul was on YouTube, was all over YouTube at the time, helping me understand the problems and the perils of the fiat monetary system. That's really where I understood what money was. And from there, the problem was that all the gold bugs were advocating for gold. I just didn't see gold as a viable opportunity for us to go back to a sound money system, halal money system. And being in technology at the time, I easily saw and remembered the Bitcoin that I had bought with my brother a couple of years earlier, that Bitcoin is just a better version of gold. And if enough people took the time to study Bitcoin, and it took me 2 years, but there was no real Bitcoin education or advocates at the time. So it's much easier today with conferences like these and influencers like Muslim Bitcoiner over here to really understand Bitcoin. And so in 2016, I was sort of like rounding out my first company, trying to figure out what to do next. But that's when it really clicked. And I sold everything I had. When I say everything, I mean all my stocks, any 401ks from any prior jobs. I sold my car. I sold whatever, like little Apple. I had an Apple Watch that mom gifted me one time. I sold that also, and I went all in on Bitcoin. And I haven't looked back since. And I guess that was sort of my intro to Bitcoin. Coinbits started about a year later, and maybe we can take it from there later.
Yeah, I've also sold some furniture to buy Bitcoin. So it's something that once you get into Bitcoin and you start saving for yourself in the future and your children, you decide that you don't need as many material possessions, and you start selling anything you don't need and converting it into future economic energy. So That's beautiful. Yeah, I'd like to maybe go a little bit deeper. So you mentioned the gold bugs, um, and you mentioned that there weren't many resources at the time. And so, uh, how did you, you know, really understand Bitcoin? Was it going into the technological side and really looking at the code base with your brother who was a software engineer? Was it something else? Was there someone you met who maybe finally got you over the hurdle? Because for all of us, it's not a quick process. It takes time, right? And you said a few years for you, it was a few years for me. So just if you could go a little bit deeper there, that would be appreciated.
Yeah, I think the one thing that really did it for me was the permissionless nature of Bitcoin. There, being a Palestinian, and I was in 8th grade when 9/11 happened, so that had a pretty big impact on my upbringing. And whether it was having to try a little extra harder to assimilate, just trying to grow up in a Western country, and kind of having that as part of your backdrop. I'm sure a lot of us can share that experience. But for us, being a Palestinian, we just saw in real life, sort of the reality on the ground in Palestine. And then what's being sort of like portrayed to us on the media, I just had a complete distrust of what was being channeled to us on the TV. And so I feel like I had a pretty unique perspective, sort of growing up with that lens, that allowed me to really appreciate freedom and truth. And I feel like I found that in Bitcoin. And the rubber hit the road for me the moment I sent my first Bitcoin transaction, and not through the exchanges. The moment that you have real money on a native Bitcoin wallet and you send it peer to peer without anyone knowing and without having to ask anybody for permission to send that Bitcoin, that's when it clicked. And it was the permissionless aspect of Bitcoin that really brought it home for me.
Yeah, I think I just want to mention so that everybody's clear on this particular nature of Bitcoin, the permissionlessness. When you travel overseas, they don't let you take more than 10,000 USD. Like if you have more than $10,000, you got to declare it. Try traveling with gold. They'll confiscate it if you have enough. With Bitcoin, they don't know what you're traveling with. You can travel with a private password in your mind, and you could travel with $1 billion. That's the power of Bitcoin that I think is really important for understand, especially for us Muslims who are under the spotlight. We need tools like this, and so I appreciate you for bringing that up.
Absolutely.
I want to discuss one of the things that's been brought up, and you've had a unique experience with this, which is the volatility of Bitcoin. So having been in it since 2013 and 14, you've seen all the ups and downs, the roller coaster of the Bitcoin price. And, nowadays, now that Bitcoin's over $80,000, I see people, get scared when it drops to 75, right? Which is not that big of a move compared to what you've been through. So what got you comfortable with the volatility of Bitcoin? Was it something about your Islamic faith that got you finally comfortable with the volatility? Was it just time in the market? Maybe you could talk to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the answer is pretty simple, but I'll give a little bit of context. I think for me, when Bitcoin clicked, the value superseded any other potential con or negative that that people attributed to Bitcoin. And I hear a lot when I talk to people about Bitcoin, it's the volatility. It's like, I get it and I see the problem, but the volatility. And I think the people in this room are very privileged to be here in this country, to have the discretionary funds to invest and save in Bitcoin, to take time out of their days and weekends to come and learn about Bitcoin with us here together. But we don't have an excuse anymore. Up until now, we were all, or up until last couple of years, we were relegated to a system that was disenfranchising, that censored our community, that confiscated and debanked our community. But today, a couple of Muslims are telling you up front that there is an alternative. And we have no excuse anymore. And so my immediate response to that question today about volatility is that this is the price of entry, and it's worth it. What comes later and what comes next in the system and the world that's coming, this is the price of entry. And take your privilege that we all have and recognize it, because there are people around the world that don't have the same privilege we have. So that's how I see it, Brother Muhammad, is that it's a price of entry, and and more practically speaking, I'll say that the vision is a long vision. And start out with something that you're comfortable with. Start out with maybe maybe a 5 or 10% allocation of Bitcoin of your personal wealth. You will naturally see the inclination, as every other Bitcoiner will tell you, that 5 or 10% inclination or allocation to Bitcoin will quickly become 50%, then 60, then 80, and then you will start calling yourself a Bitcoiner. It's a natural phenomenon that we've all go through. I'll be here on the other side of it, waiting for you guys. But the vision that Bitcoin provides, especially for our community, is too important. And so for those that are privileged enough to have learned about Bitcoin today, not tomorrow, volatility is your price of entry.
Yeah, and we're also early in Bitcoin's life cycle, right? Bitcoin just celebrated its sweet 16. It's 16 years old. And if you look at any other monetary asset, including gold, it takes a long time as a new asset class is monetizing and as people are adopting it for the volatility to go down, right? So it's volatile today, and it won't be in the future. But in the future, your price of entry is going to be much higher, right? In at least fiat terms. And so that's another way to think about it. Now, I think one of the questions that's been written down on an index card and some other folks have asked is, how do I invest in Bitcoin? How do I get started? And so I want to talk a little bit about Coinbits and sort of what you're doing at Coinbits to enable people to get started on their Bitcoin journey.
Yeah, well, thank you for the opportunity to talk about Coinbits. My brother and I, after we've sold our first company, we were thinking about what to do next. Actually, at the time, I had reached out to brother Ashraf about some advice, and I remember taking that summer 2017 off, and we realized that there were a bunch of friends and family that were coming to us asking us, "Hey, Maher, Yusuf, like, which Bitcoin should I buy?" And that's when we realized that Coinbase, who was the main player at the time, had really lost the plot. For us, we had saw Bitcoin as really the only practical solution to freedom, and everything else was really sort of a byproduct of the existing system that existed. And so we felt, being in tech, being founders, having the means, that it was important that someone built a Bitcoin-only on-ramp that was easy enough for grandma to use. And so that was the mindset that we had going into building Coinbits. So just for those that aren't familiar, Coinbits is an on-ramp onto Bitcoin. It's an automated savings app for Bitcoin. One of the things I'll touch on is sort of also our philosophy also, that when it came to building companies in tech, we just saw how important of a role Bitcoin is going to play in the world. And it was important for us to not just take money from anyone. And what I mean by that is as investor money. And so for us, we made a very conscious decision to not take on venture funding. You don't know the strings attached that come typically with venture funding. You don't know who are the LPs that are invested in the fund. And we didn't want to be in a position 5, 10, 15 years later where we're compromising our values building on Bitcoin. And so, that's a little bit of how we got started and what Coinbits is about. So today we're a bootstrapped, Muslim-owned business. Alhamdulillah, it's family. We like to call ourselves sort of a family-owned Bitcoin brokerage that makes it really easy for people to on-ramp into Bitcoin in a passive and safe way.
Yeah, definitely check it out if you're getting started on your Bitcoin journey. Coinbits has a great user experience, and alhamdulillah, it's Muslim-owned, so we can trust them. I want to talk a little bit about the vision that you have for Bitcoin's intersection with the Muslim Ummah, right? What are the opportunities ahead within Bitcoin for Muslims, and where should we be focused? So maybe you could touch on that.
Yeah, absolutely, guys. I think I've gotten a chance to like meet some pretty incredible people in this room already, and this is a big vision that we're talking. We're talking about rebuilding a parallel system, parallel economies, parallel money, parallel civilization, built on sound halal principles that are taught to us in our faith. So this touches every aspect of society. And so we're going to need help, and the opportunities that I see as Muslims are vast. Everything from getting involved at the government, regulatory, and compliance level. There's media and helping us shape the narrative, helping, as if you're a journalist, showcasing the work Muslims are doing in Bitcoin to build momentum, to build inspiration. Obviously, technology. That's sort of where I'm seeing myself right now. Is there's still a lot of work to be built in the tech world. Outside of Coinbits, I also run a small coffee shop with my wife, and people constantly ask me, "Hey, how come I can't pay with Bitcoin yet?" There's some still major gaps that still need to be met, in the payments infrastructure. And so, if you have experience in tech and you have knowledge in payments, there's so much more work to be done on the tech side. I think we touched on media. So yeah, I mean, I think the opportunities are endless, Mohammed. That I'm sure you could help me come up with a couple of others, but yeah, that just a few that come off the top of my mind, inshallah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we have brothers in the audience that have brilliant ideas, including how, our masajid can hold Bitcoin, custody Bitcoin in a safe way, do proper succession planning, how families can hold Bitcoin and ensure that it gets passed on to their children. So Bitcoin inheritance for Muslims, especially given how the inheritance laws, within Sharia are different than the state laws that we sort of, inherit here in the United States, right? And so I think there's a lot of opportunity to build in this space. If you're looking to build, if you're not a builder and you want to invest or collaborate with your skill set, there's tons of opportunities. And so I know we have about 7 minutes left, and we've run out of time on the Q&A side, so I do want to open it up to the audience for Q&A. So I'm going to ask Salah to grab a mic and walk around to the audience. Maybe we could start over here with the brother here. Maybe you can project your voice, unless Salah can make it over.
I could repeat the question too. So. Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of different levels or entry points that you can enter Bitcoin in the tech world. You can be involved at the protocol level, as Abdullah and I think some of the other speakers had mentioned. Bitcoin is open source. If you have an idea to help improve Bitcoin, you can submit something called a BIP, and it's basically the community can vote on it, and if there's enough momentum and support around the improvement or the enhancement to the open source protocol, it could actually be implemented into the Bitcoin network. It's something maybe we continue to emphasize, and I think it's important to emphasize, there is no one entity that controls Bitcoin. It's totally decentralized, and I think that's what's the magic really behind it. What allows Bitcoin to be permissionless is the fact that I can take it off any of my exchanges, whether it's at Coinbase or Coinbits or wherever, Binance. You can take that Bitcoin and as I like how Horace put it, but you could be your own Swiss bank in your own home. And so you could start out at the protocol level. You can come in at the application layer. There's so many opportunities to build better user experiences. I think UX is still a problem. So that's where we come in also with Coinbits, is just trying to help it easier, make it easier for people to learn about Bitcoin, use Bitcoin. I think if you continue up the value chain, there's making it easy to spend Bitcoin, as I mentioned, with like POS systems. And we were just talking about prior to this talk, getting businesses to making it easier for business to accept Bitcoin. There was a brother that asked about Gaza. I personally have sent money for humanitarian aid in Gaza, knowing full well that money is going to the right places and for the right needs. Unfortunately, though, there is no circular economy in Gaza right now. And there's still an education gap, and we still need to help educate people on how to use Bitcoin, how to download a wallet, not to, not a Binance wallet or anything like that that could be obstructed, and has to be permissioned. But there are so many different ways in the stack on the tech side that you can enter. We can talk about details later. We're also hiring, by the way. So
Assalamu alaikum. In the back.
Assalamu alaikum, brother.
I wanted to piggyback on your point about sending money to Gaza. So with all the sort of choke points that are coming up in current policies, and it may be permissionless, but is not free from surveillance, right? With KYC, every transaction is monitored. So as Muslims, like, how do I optimize not only acquiring the Bitcoin in a way that remains anonymous and then sending it in a way that remains anonymous? Because yes, it may get there, but we may face consequences.
That's a great question, brother. If I could answer that, I don't know if you have a follow, but I can answer that directly. So there are a lot of legal ways for you to anonymize your Bitcoin purchases. One, you could get paid for your work in Bitcoin. So let's say you work with an employer on a contractor basis, for instance, you can request to get paid in Bitcoin. So you're not actually buying it from the exchanges and having to, submit a whole KYC process. Secondly, P2P. The P2P network around the world is only growing. It's probably a little less, maybe less convenient here in the U.S., but around the world, P2P is the way I've seen personally, not just small amounts of Bitcoin, like large amounts of Bitcoin to be traded. And obviously that ends up being, non-KYC. So there are also, there really is no other way. If you are buying from the exchanges, Coinbits, for example, is a regulated exchange. We have to comply by the local laws. And so if you are buying on Coinbits, it is, it's KYC'd Bitcoin. And you're right. It's important. The brother highlighted a really important point about Bitcoin is that the moment a Bitcoin is sort of tied to your identity, it is traceable. There are many firms out there that can use this superpower both for good, right, but also not for good. And I think that's indicative of why Bitcoin is a superpower, because it can be used, for both ways.
Yeah, and a lot of Bitcoiners will have a sort of, especially in the West, will have a KYC stack. This is like Bitcoin they've purchased on exchanges. And then they'll have a non-KYC stack, which is Bitcoin that you either get peer-to-peer or you can mine Bitcoin.
Mine it, yeah.
There are also services that allow you to coin join and create anonymity that way. So there are solutions. It takes a little bit of extra work, but even for a non-technical person like me, it's possible. And so I'm going to put that out there. I know, Shamoon, you have a question about the mics.
So just real quick to answer the anonymity, Wasabi is a mixer. I'm not condemning or condoning it, but we'll just put it there. So question for Maher. What is your personal perspective on, I'll monitor my language, altcoins?
Yeah, I think my personal view has been that it's a distraction from the mission that I care about with Bitcoin. And so, like any sort of free market guy, if you want to gamble, go ahead and gamble. And I see altcoins as just sort of a mimicry of the gambling that we see in stock markets. Can people take a more sophisticated sort of approach when it comes to trading and investing? Sure, it's not my skill set. And so for me, Shamoon, it's been more of like a sort of a casino type of experience. Yeah, so like I said, for me personally, it's just been a distraction from the real progress that's happening, and that's on Bitcoin. And frankly, the market will speak for itself. I think we've seen even just this year alone, Bitcoin has 3x'd in price, over the last 12 to 18 months has tripled in price. When you've seen like the second biggest Ethereum hasn't budged in price at all. So the market will continue to wake up to the fact that the only real work happening in crypto, quote unquote, is Bitcoin. All right, sit down.
So the question I'm thinking through as a noob in this field is the non-KYC P2P component, which seems to be where the power would be for the Ummah, and the likeliness of that to be heavily regulated, especially cross-border transfer of capital. EU, I was reading about, I'm not very privy to the details, but just late last year have their first regulations in regards to that. Where do you think the trajectory of that goes for that sphere of Bitcoin, and does that sort of neuter the entire project?
Yeah, that's a really important question. So I think that you're going to have two camps. You're going to have governments and authorities that will embrace Bitcoin and will work with it and will create structures and regulatory structures that will create certain guardrails that sort of make it work. But then you'll find governments and authorities that are very antagonistic to Bitcoin. And one thing to keep in mind, and as Bitcoiners like to say, that all governments are not equal. And governments are actually adversarial in nature. And Bitcoin and capital will flow where it's treated well. And so what we'll see over the next couple of decades is that governments that will cooperate and work with Bitcoin and understand the inevitable game theory behind Bitcoin will flourish, will attract the world's best talent, and will foster a growth in civilization that, in my opinion, we'll have never seen before. The countries that will fight countries that will continue to clamp down on economic freedoms, will see the opposite effect. And so you will get both. We do not live in a monolith, and every single person in this room will have to face that economic decision in the future of, do I just pick up and move one day to a geography that's much more friendly to Bitcoin, as we've seen in El Salvador and other countries, or stay in a more dictator type of environment where they want to control and surveil everything about you.
Yeah, and I'll add that even within the United States, the 50 states will have different approaches. And so
right.
the state of Texas might love its freedom way more and might be way more Bitcoin friendly than a state like New York.
That's right.
So those are also changes to watch on the policy side.
I have a question here. Assalamu alaikum. I want to understand a bit of your perspective around, so for money adoption, there are like three major phases. Medium exchange, basically store wealth, and then medium exchange, and then you have unit of accounting.
That's right.
So store wealth part, I think we have passed that part, but for the medium exchange, unit of accounting, I think Bitcoin, it's my understanding of how things are, but what's your perspective on L2s? And there are like several out there. So what's your perspective of which one would you pick? Do you agree with that? Or you still see Bitcoin doing the medium exchange and the unit of accounting part? Depending specifically regarding the 10-minute transition settle time we have.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question for those that aren't familiar. So a lot of what we talked about today is what we call like layer one, or Bitcoin as a protocol. And for those that don't know, it takes, for a Bitcoin block, takes 10 minutes to verify a transaction on Bitcoin. If you want to have even a more secure transaction, typically people will wait 2 or 3 or even up to 6 blocks. So it's about 60 minutes to have transactions validated. Especially think about larger transactions, you'd probably want more confirmations, as we call them. So over the years, a new technology called layer 2 has emerged for more faster, cheaper, and more private payments. Probably the most popular and I would say the technology that's gotten the most adoption is something called Lightning. So personally, I use Lightning, although not as much as I should. But right now, I would say Lightning is probably in the lead in terms of adoption. We have the most engineering, technical support behind Lightning. There are drawbacks. Lightning is more centralized. Lightning also, is a little bit more complicated to set up and to bootstrap a Lightning channel than just opening up and running a node, as Abdullah taught us earlier. So there are some challenges. There are startups and teams working on trying to, make it easier to start up a Lightning node. But yeah, so these are certain trade-offs that we're currently facing right now. Yeah, good question. I think it's the best idea we have right now. But you don't need Lightning for it to be a unit of account. right?
Yeah.
So Lightning, so will ultimately settle on chain. And so Lightning, I would say, is really good for those, micro payments, things like that. So,
Yeah, Lightning's fantastic for medium of exchange. I think unit of account is really just companies, corporations adopting Bitcoin on their balance sheets and inevitably denominating their equity value in Bitcoin. So you can do that on a personal level. Like the two of us think about our net worth in Bitcoin. We don't think about it in dollars anymore,
absolutely.
right? So on a personal level, you could start measuring your own net worth in Bitcoin. Even if you're holding dollars, you could say, okay, well, today, if I've got $50,000 in my bank account, right, I've got 5/8 of a Bitcoin. Okay, well, see where that is in 6 months and see where that is in a year, right? So you could start denominating your own personal household balance sheet in Bitcoin, and eventually small businesses will do it. Large corporations on the stock market are starting to do it. So it's a progression, and everybody will enter at a different time. I think we have time for maybe one more.
Yeah, I don't want to hold anybody from lunch.
Sure. Thanks for taking my question this morning. When you think through sort of the, that's good. When you think through sort of the ideal adoption glide path for Bitcoin, do you see that ultimately being kind of sitting in coexistence with a U.S. dollar-based system, or at some point overtaking a U.S. dollar-based global economy? And then second part is, the successful adoption of Bitcoin. Do you feel like it has to come with the active participation of those that are currently in power and influence of the existing construct?
Could you rephrase that last part of your question
Yeah,
so to make sure I understand it correctly?
The largest the active participators in the existing system, such as the central banks and obviously the financial institutions that are actively trading with the U.S. dollar.
Yeah.
Would they need to be more and more actively involved or participating in the Bitcoin?
Got it. Yeah, thank you. That's a really good question. So the brother was asking around adoption and sort of the large incumbent players and what role they'll play in the future. First, I do think we'll have sort of parallel system for a while where you'll continue to maybe save in Bitcoin but spend in fiat, as we like to say as Bitcoiners. So I think that'll happen for a little while. And as that's happening, Abdullah taught us earlier today that, and wanted to just drive the point home, that the existing fiat currency will continue to devalue. And so I think there's going to be just a human threshold with which there's just enough that we can take, where enough people will just accelerate that devaluing by boycotting and just moving away from fiat currency in general. And so the only viable alternative that I think that we're all really talking about today is Bitcoin. And so I think inevitably you do end up on a Bitcoin standard. I think inevitably, all fiat currencies will have to go away. Reason being is a very practical sense here that, you can't keep your money in something that's constantly eroding. Think of people who are in these war-torn countries or economically slaved countries where their currencies are completely devalued. I think I just heard recently, just last year, Egypt unfortunately went through another 40% inflation rate, and so people's savings, their work, their effort, completely wiped away with nothing in their control. And so if they had Bitcoin, or even in their case, dollar, is a better alternative. And so I think the story is inevitable also for the dollar. And so where the incumbents will play, I think this is a really interesting question. We can get into a lot of the game theory with Bitcoin. I'll pose this question to you, or this thought exercise, that if a central bank around the world, any central bank, believes that even Bitcoin has a 1% chance at dethroning the existing fiat system, then the smart bet for any central bank is to allocate 1% of its assets in Bitcoin. Well, what if every other central bank is thinking the same thing? And so this is where the game theory gets interesting with respect to adoption, adversarial natures between countries and nation states. And we could have a pretty fun discussion on sort of what happens next.
Any parting thoughts?
I think the brother had maybe one quick question. He just raised his hand if
Sure.
we can get to him. Walaikum salam.
Like in future, in the system of payment, hash graph is a threat to the Bitcoin. Because Bitcoin is a blockchain, it's not a hash graph, and hash graph is more for the payment system, faster, quick for the payment system. So how Bitcoin in future can, compromise with this hash graph in compare when the financial system comes?
Yep. So I'm not familiar with hash graph, I think, or hash draft. I'm not familiar with this technology, but I think the broader question is, other technologies that are settle faster times, that can move, and settle blocks faster, can move money a lot faster than Bitcoin. Plenty of those blockchains exist, and that's always been sort of the big sort of selling point for a lot of these blockchains. But the one thing you compromise is security. The one thing you compromise is certainty. And so the hashing network, the mining hashing network behind Bitcoin dwarfs anything even remotely close. And what that means is Bitcoin is the most secure network. And though it's willing to compromise a little bit on cost, and it's willing to compromise a little bit on speed, but the one thing that it's not willing to compromise is security. And so as Bitcoin, we would like to educate people that Bitcoin is actually the biggest honeypot, that if you could figure out how to hack Bitcoin, you will be the richest man in the world. But unfortunately, in the last 15 years, no one's been able to figure out how to hack it. And so, yes, there are faster blockchains, but when you think about Bitcoin competing not just with Visa or payment networks, but it's competing for money, it's competing against central banks, then you realize what's really important here is the decentralized aspect of Bitcoin. In order to remain decentralized, you need its security. You need the hash power that backs Bitcoin.
Amazing. All right. Any parting thoughts before we?
Thank you, first of all, for having me again, Brother Muhammad. This has been an honor, and I hope to hang out with you guys. I'll be here, the rest of the day. I'd love to chat it up. I'll just say that I'm so happy that you guys are all here. You're here for a reason. Something brought you here. I hope that you can take away a little nugget from the few speakers that have been able to, to talk about Bitcoin. This isn't how to get rich. This isn't a conference on how to, make more money. This is an initiative to help our Muslim ummah to recognize that we have an opportunity to rebuild systems from the ground up based on the most halal and Islamic principles that we have at our disposal today. There is no more excuse for any of us. I promise you, Bitcoin is a real alternative. Give it a shot. Study it. Read the books in front of you. Follow my brother, Muslim Bitcoiner, on Twitter. Follow Bitcoin Majlis. And I hope to see, inshallah, this community grow. And let's do it. Thanks, guys.
Jazakallah khair.